Hello, my name is Phil Gore. I'm the Director of Board Services with VSBA. I'm very new to my role here, but not new to this work. Just a little bit about me. I'm a former school board member from the Seattle area. I served in a rural suburban school district for several years on a board. We were a dairy farm community that became overtaken by Microsoft employees. So fascinating trial by fire with cultural change for a school district during my years of service there. I just came to VSBA this last month, and so this is my first opportunity to provide a webinar for our association. I'm in my 15th year in this work in school board development. I have some advanced degrees in educational leadership and policy studies, and I've kind of specialized, if you will, academically in the importance of local control and localism, in addition to superintendent evaluation, and in particular, looking at what's most important to school boards when they evaluate a superintendent. Well, you will learn a little bit more about me as we go along, but let me just share with you some of the points and themes here for our day. First of all, we really welcome questions and comments, and please use the chat to enter questions and comments, and Carrie Lamb on the VSBA staff will review those and find an opportunity perhaps during the webinar, toward the end of the webinar for that. We'll ask for some feedback at the end of this webinar. We'd love to hear from you. We're always trying to improve everything that we do, and your feedback's very important to us. So after the webinar, you'll receive an email that has some summary information about this, a link to the slides that are used, and some other resources. We'll also be able to answer questions or explain things a little bit further in those in that follow-up email as needed. So webinars are archived on the YouTube channel and also on the VSBA website. And again, we thank you for participating in the webinar today. We hope that you get some nuggets out of this. I have a couple of main points that I really want to emphasize as a former school board chair myself, and reflecting on this work the last couple of decades. One of the things that seems to be missed sometimes, missed opportunities, is for the board chair to take responsibility for making sure the school board gets developed. You'll hear a little bit more about that as we go along. But none of us come to this work knowing everything that we need to know about school board service. In fact, quite the opposite. A researcher friend of mine in Montana frequently says, school governance is not intuitive. And my friend Ivan served on school boards for 20 years, was also a college administrator, and he's delved deeply into understanding school boards and what works well. But one of the things that is a missed opportunity is often just learning together as a team. And you know, if we're going to do good work, we need to do it well. And a lot of times that's just something that we need to emphasize, particularly as a chair of a board, is the team learning together. The second thing you'll hear me refer to in different ways is often known as board operating protocols or team norms. That's really critical. It was probably the first thing that I did as a school board chair, called a workshop session. And we sat together one evening and we worked through our norms for how we would do our work together. You'll notice as this webinar was advertised, a lot of the success of a school board really depends on the chair. The chair is responsible for this leadership of the team, for the overall board operations, kind of setting the culture, if you will, the climate in which the board will operate and oversee the work of the district. Ultimately, you know, there's all of that, and then plus simply running efficient and effective board meetings. So we hope that you gain some insights here as we go along. Again, you'll catch some of my values. One is curiosity. And I would just really encourage you to think about the word curiosity, that concept, what it means to you. Reflect on what you're curious about today, what you might like to learn more about or know more about. But also at the end of this webinar, I want us to just really leave with a sense of what else might we need to know to be most effective or to improve the opportunities and outcomes for the students in our district. We've organized our thoughts here into these roles of a board chair. First of all, again, as team leader, what will the chair do to promote the development of a strong team that understands and fulfills its essential work? How will the board chair link or partner with the administration, particularly with the superintendent, to maintain a strong connection and build a sense of common vision and teamwork with the superintendent? What will the board chair do to be the meeting leader, to organize in advance and to conduct effective meetings? I might add to that, as the meeting leader, what will the chair do to ensure that the meetings are evaluated, that the board is modeling the type of continuous improvement and learning that you want to see have happen all throughout the system? And then very importantly, the board chair plays a role as the legal guardian for the board and to a big extent, the district. So promoting and leading lawful and ethical operations of the board. Developing the team. Like I said, this is really important. The board chair needs to take time. And if somebody told you that being the chair didn't take more time, they weren't being honest with you. It takes a lot more time and energy to be the chair than it does to be a regular member of the board. And one of the things that you need to do is build relationships with each member. That might involve meeting for coffee or lunch, or having phone calls, or separate emails. We'll talk a little bit about email communication, but emails or text, just building a relationship with each member. And you'll find that your work will be much more effective, and the board as a whole will be much more effective if you build relationships with your fellow team members. The board chair plays a critical role for ensuring that new members are welcome to the board, that they get a thorough and adequate orientation to all the things that they need to know, and understanding that none of us will know everything we need to know about school board service through a half day or a one-day orientation. It's really important that the board chair take an opportunity to assign a mentor to new board members, to give them someone, ensure they've got, a phone number that they can text or call of a veteran member that can help them know where things are, how to go through the policies, how to access things, and even how to ask good questions. This goes together with just a spirit of inclusion. We're talking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a society today. The board needs to model that. Again, you as a collective team are the leadership and governance of the school district. And so modeling an inclusive culture on the board, making sure that every member, but particularly new members, but every member understands that they're a necessary and a vital part of the team. That relates to board dynamics, right? When we have a culture of inclusion, people feel welcome and trust is high. People are able to ask good questions and to share what's important to them. So part of that is being mindful of the needs and interests of each member. Sometimes the word agenda is viewed as a negative thing. Well, so-and-so has an agenda, or this other board member has an agenda. We all got on a school board because we have an agenda. And we may consciously think that our agenda is to promote the well-being and the success of our schools, our district, and our students. But we have a certain slant. Each of us has a certain slant. We have values that are important to us. And as you talk as a team, this is really important that we understand each other's values, where someone is coming from. And sometimes, if one of our fellow board members is going through a hard time in her life or his life, really critical again that we know where someone is coming from. And, if they're seeming a little short with us, or they're not available for a week or two, maybe there's a good reason for that, and we can extend some understanding. I know team norms or operating protocols. One of the fundamental things that a board chair can do is to make sure that the board has operating protocols in place, a written document, but then that has to be revisited at least annually, and any and every time there's a new member on the team. You need to go through the protocols together, discuss them, discuss what they mean to you, why they're important, and sometimes maybe they need to be changed. This work of developing the team, again, very important. You want to establish a strong connection. Excuse me a minute, I'm going to make sure. I think my slides aren't advancing the way I wanted. There we go. I mentioned this idea of learning together as a team, and let me emphasize this one point about that. So research has shown since the early 2000s that school boards that learn together are more likely to be governing and overseeing districts that are improving in student learning. And that has been shown in multi-state studies since about 2002. And I would say all up until the last 2 or 3 years, there is research out there that's suggesting that boards that learn together as a team with their superintendent are more likely to be leading systems that are improving in achievement. And it's really vital. I think one book that came out on this 3 years ago talked about the subject of deep learning. So that when the board is going to make a decision on a particular issue that's really of importance to the district, that the board is learning everything they need to know about that particular decision in order to make the best choice that they can. I would just encourage you as a board chair to make sure you have a calendar and a plan for what your board will learn this year, and be intentional. Think about, what do we as a team need to know more about? Is it understanding data? Is it the demographics of our community? Is it the concerns or needs of minority students? Is it concerns or needs around staffing? What do we as a board need to learn more about in order to do our job effectively? And again, the board chair needs to take responsibility for that. So we can talk about the role of the school board just briefly here. Very important, the sense of a trustee. We are not elected by our local community simply to be a delegate. A delegate goes to a convention and votes the way that someone has told them to. Whether you go to a political convention or another type of convention, typically delegates are sent to vote the way they're told. A trustee, on the other hand, is elected to exercise his or her best judgment and to provide oversight on behalf of the community, the owners of the school system, for public education within their community. The board needs to ensure that there's high quality education for all students, and we might underscore that and say each and every student. So the board being mindful, is it not just the aggregate of all students seem to be doing well, but are all groups and individual students reaching their full potential and having the outcomes that we would hope for each of our children? Recognizing that there's a responsibility here for this investment. We often say that school board members are stewards of the community's two most precious resources, right? Their children and their money. So when the board hires a superintendent, approves a budget, they are purchasing education of the children living within their boundaries and attending their schools. You need to make sure that you're getting a good return on that investment. The board has a role in operations. It's not to run the schools, but is to ensure that the system operates effectively and ethically. And that's a real important responsibility of the board. The role of the supervisory union board laid out in statute is to oversee education for the region through the supervisory union, promoting equal education opportunity across the supervisory union, assuring mutual accountability with the superintendent, and seeking greater student opportunity and operating efficiency. As you think about something wrong with that slide there. I want to make sure that just to highlight a couple of things. Sometimes boards are accused of being micromanaging, overly involved in the details of a school district. Other times boards are accused of rubber stamping or just approving everything that comes through. While it's a wonderful thing, and you'll hear me say in just a few minutes, it's important that the board chair work for consensus. A unanimous vote, whether it's 5-0, 7-0, 6-0, a unanimous vote all the time is not necessarily a good thing. If the board has had conversation in public and deliberated and discussed issues, and they can come to agreement and vote unanimously, that's great. But if the board is always voting unanimously, regardless of the weight of the decision or the issue before them, it doesn't really appear good to the public that the board is exercising due diligence and not just rubber stamping whatever's brought their way or exercising groupthink. So a board needs to find that balance between being overly involved and prescribing things, micromanaging, and sort of being too hands-off. And I would encourage you as a board chair to have that conversation from time to time with your full board and superintendent. Talk about the boundaries and what would be too prescriptive or micromanaging versus what might be not really exercising your responsibility. So I say that in advance of talking a little bit about chain of command. It's very important in school systems, and we all learn this over time, that there is a proper chain of command and that things are followed. Chain of command, it probably comes from a military term and maybe off-putting to some. In fact, I know it is. So use a different term there or send me an email when we're done for a better way to talk about this. The board has the supervisory responsibility, the oversight of one employee, and that's the superintendent that you hire. And so I know that we're including a conversation here because the lines can get blurry when you're a board member and you're working closely with a school and a particular principal, and it can start to feel like that somehow you're supposed to oversee or supervise the principal and the work of that school. And that is absolutely not the case. It is always a mistake when a board member or the board as a whole begins to think that they are somehow supposed to be telling individuals within the system how to do their jobs on a day in and day out basis. The principal is an educational leader for the school, and he or she is accountable to the superintendent. The superintendent in a healthy system is usually regarded as the CEO for the district, and they're a systems leader. They need to be accountable ultimately up to the board. And the board's role is in setting the vision, the policy, and improving the resources for the work of the district, but ultimately holding the system accountable. And one of the primary ways that the board holds the system accountable is through the evaluation of the superintendent. Now, we don't have a lot of time to talk about superintendent evaluation today, but I would say that it is, probably the most vital thing that a board does throughout the year is to evaluate the superintendent. And it's really critical that that is done well, that there aren't surprises, that it's fair, that it's reasonable. Never forget the superintendent is a person too, and he or she deserves the respect, the guidance, the support from the board throughout the year, but ultimately also needs to be accountable to the board for performance on agreed objectives in advance. Well, this picture may say different things to you. You may see yourself in this picture somewhere. To me, this picture is a sign of dysfunction. One of the things that we've learned through the research in school governance the past couple of decades is that dysfunction on a school board results in chaos in classrooms. And the board really, really needs to have its act together. If the board is going to have its act together, it's probably, and most often, because of a highly capable leader in who you've selected as a board chair. The board chair has responsibility not only for organizing meetings, but really for organizing the overall work of the board. I was so impressed with a board chair about 2 years ago. There were a group of people, actually it was staff members that came to a board meeting, and they were very upset about something, and they were very emotional, and they were, expressing themselves in public comment. And as the board chair took authority over the meeting, and he said, and I'm leaving out the name here, but he said, this is not our district's way. And he really emphasized that, screaming, yelling, demanding wasn't the culture that their district embodied. That's critical. The board as a whole, but the board chair in particular, has a paramount role in leading the culture, the way you do things around here for the school system. And a big piece of this is organizing and conducting effective meetings. Meetings need to have a flow to them. Let me borrow this word and probably say it a few times. Your school board meetings should be intentional. They're an opportunity for the board to communicate what is most important to the board. I love what one district does. They say they make the main thing the first thing. And every single meeting they have, the first thing on the agenda is a report about how the students are doing in their district. And it's not just a report like a static report, but sometimes it's an interactive conversation led by an assistant superintendent or another administrator or the board chair. It's a conversation about how the students are doing and different ways to do that, making it specific on a particular topic. But I just love that, making the main thing the first thing. Your board meetings, again, are a communication opportunity for the community and for the staff, as well as the board itself, to set, this is what's important to us. When you build an effective agenda, I think a brilliant opportunity is to connect the agenda with your board goals. And you should have established some goals for the year, maybe 3 to 5 or 3 to 6. And whenever and wherever possible, there's a clear alignment with what is on your agenda and what is on your board goals. I've seen districts do this to a great extent with a strategic plan, where when there is a report or a discussion of an item, the board chair will state, this item relates to strategic plan goal number 2, objective 3, and we're talking about this because, right? So there's a framing there. Now that may be a little bit advanced for some districts, but I do think it's something we can all do. Communicating, this is why this is important to us. You really want to include a manageable number of issues so that everything can be given the necessary consideration while you keep meetings to a reasonable length. In your board planning calendar, your administration and board chair should both have an idea of this is when things are coming up, whether it's to do with the budget, whether it's to do with curriculum, employment contracts, all the things that kind of have a cyclical nature to them. When you evaluate the board, when you evaluate the board's performance, and then you evaluate the superintendent's performance, those things should fit into a calendar so that you know when a specific item should be brought up. But limiting action to items that the board has had time to consider. So I know worst case scenario is being asked as a board to make a decision on something that you haven't had adequate time to review, to study background information. And I would encourage whenever possible, I know that sometimes there can be a little bit of a negotiation there, but whenever possible, if something is brought up and you need more time, ask for more time, take more time, table something until the next meeting. You want to ensure that the meeting is clear so the public can be informed of the topics to be discussed. I was with a board in the Burlington area last evening, and we talked about this. We talked about how they had some unique nomenclature to the way they do their work. And I emphasized that it was really important that they explain that terminology. You all know this now, but education has its own secret code language, just like painters and plumbers and attorneys do. Everything you do in life has a unique set of words and language. And it's really important that the board take time to explain the acronyms and to expect of the superintendent and his or her staff that when they make reports, they're not just talking in ABC's acronyms, but they're actually explaining in common language what they're talking about, right? Not throwing around all the educationese. You got it. But the board chair has a critical role to play in ensuring that things are clear so that the public is informed. Super important in Vermont. Most states, Robert's Rules of Order are kind of a guideline for school board meetings. Here, it's a requirement. You want to become as familiar as possible with Robert's Rules and allowing yourself some grace, some latitude. You may have someone else in your board meetings who's the expert parliamentarian with whom you can refer as needed, but be as familiar as you can with the major and most common motions that come up in Robert's Rules, particularly those like a motion to adjourn that become kind of a priority motion. And so knowing the difference between a priority motion and regular motion, I was just reading yesterday about, making amendments to amendments. And I was pleased to read one attorney had written that you couldn't amend an amendment to an amendment. And that's good because I've seen that done before. And you want to be familiar with that. VSBA has some great resources, some webinars available on Robert's Rules of Order. And we would encourage you to develop some expertise there. Ultimately, it's an important role of the board chair to ensure that the whole board is obeying open meetings and public records laws. Now, these are increasingly important. They've always been important. They did come about for good reasons, right? Generally across the country, these are referred to as sunshine laws. And the idea that people are not supposed to be in the dark about the people's business, and that the people's business needs to be discussed in public and to the greatest extent possible with as much transparency as possible. You don't want to be found in violation of either one of these areas of law, whether it's the open meetings law or the public records law. And so the board chair, again, plays a critical role in ensuring that everyone is following these laws, not jeopardizing not only the legality of the district and the district's work, but the reputation of the district and the reputation of the board. You don't want to be thought of in the community as a group that's hiding anything or that has anything to hide. So we'll have a couple cautions along this line because this is really important too. Part of this is just following executive session requirements. It's easy, whether you've been on a school board long or you've been a part of other types of councils and boards that have executive session requirements. It's easy to start out with one topic of conversation and kind of quickly devolve into others. You need someone on your board, and generally I would say it's the board chair, but you need someone on your board that's sort of the designated executive session monitor. And they're going to raise their hand, or they're essentially going to call the question and say, I think what we're talking about is out of order and needs to be something that we bring back to open session. So you always want to state the reason why that you're going into executive session. And again, limit your conversation to the topic that you've announced. You do have the prerogative of inviting some specific people into executive session with you if their expertise, their knowledge of a situation is going to be used in consulting with or advising the board. And super important that you not take any type of vote in executive session, right? You don't even, again here, you don't even want the semblance of an accusation that the board agreed, took a straw poll and then came out and announced what it was. You really want to be above reproach when it comes to executive session requirements. So this is really important. I was at a school board meeting one night working with a board in another state a few years ago. And in the middle of the meeting, a lady made a motion to the board. She stood and said, Mr. Chair, I want to make a motion that you select such and such curriculum and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my word, what just happened here? And then I found out she was the superintendent's wife. Well, we like to say that school board meetings are held in public, but they're not the meeting. They're not a meeting of the public. They're a public meeting in the sense that the public is invited to attend, but they're not a meeting for the public to come and do its business. It is about the board doing the business for the public. And so I recognize that across any state, and Vermont would be no exception, there are probably areas where people are more formal and areas where people are less formal. And I think, you want to protect your culture, and it's fine to be a little bit informal and to be tolerant, but very important that the board chair is running the meeting. It's a meeting of the board. It's not a public meeting. People do have opportunities to express their opinion before the board, and the chair needs to monitor, that there's some decorum and reasonable rules that are being followed for public comment. That generally, in my experience, and I know we can correct this later in the webinar, generally in my experience, people should not be making disparaging remarks about personnel in a public comment, but then that gets tricky because somebody may want to say something positive about a personnel and then somebody else wants to say something negative, but that's something that you want to work out and know in advance what your rules are, what you're allowing as a district. That here again, we're just emphasizing that the board chair is a legal guardian of the district. You want to promote and facilitate lawful and ethical operations by the board. Not only do you want to try to avoid lawsuits and you want to make sure the law is followed, but here again, even the semblance, right? Or you don't even want the perception that the board is doing anything that's illegal or unethical. That becomes really important. So a few guidelines for lawful and ethical operations. One is the concept of a unified voice. This is very important. Board members don't have any power any more than any other citizen, other than when they're in a board meeting with an agenda item and a discussion that is properly called and noted. It's really only the power of the board. And even as a board chair, you want to be careful about how you speak on behalf of the board. If the board's made a decision, that's one thing. If the board hasn't made a decision, then that needs to be communicated as you share maybe your opinion or thoughts on something. The board hasn't voted on this yet. They haven't talked about it yet. And then obviously, once the board's made a decision, the board made a decision. And worst case scenario would be the board chair is speaking against a decision of the board, because that just undermines confidence in the whole school system. So the board chair plays a vital role for maintaining confidentiality of executive session. And by that, I mean holding the rest of the board accountable. And I could just add a little caveat here too. You know, a lot of things are confidential, and what's discussed in executive session is always confidential, but some information is also just privileged. And sometimes by virtue of your role on a school board, you know things. It might be about a staff member's health. It might be about a challenge or a problem with a student or family. Again, maintaining a culture that is positive and affirming and supporting of the school district and of the students that you're serving. You want to make sure the board is not even talking about what might be just privileged information or inside information callously or carelessly in the community. So having some norms about that, about what you consider to be privileged information. Again, it might not be illegal, but it wouldn't be ethical to talk about a problem that a person was having in their family or with their health. So the board chair wants to make sure that the schools are well run, but that the board is not there trying to run the schools. And that's that difference between oversight and management. We've talked a little bit as I went along here about just avoiding even the perception of a conflict of interest. We'll say just a little bit more about that. But again, recognizing that the board needs to support, and especially the board chair, the validity of all board decisions. So you really want a code of ethics. At VSBA, we've got some things to suggest, but you as a team need to talk about your norms, your operating protocols, have something in writing. 3 things that we would emphasize is that individuals will act within the scope of their official role. They'll uphold the highest of ethical standards, that they'll respect each other, their constituents, and confidentiality considerations. Those are 3 basic areas of ethics that all board members should be able to hold up to, and that we would encourage you as a board chair to help your board fulfill those 3 commitments. Managing potential conflicts of interest. Now, this can get a little tricky because all of us that serve on school boards, we live and work and often have businesses or family members that are working in the school system, attending schools. Every board has to have by law a conflict of interest policy. As the board chair, you want to make sure that's being followed. You want to make sure that, again, you're avoiding a conflict of interest, but also avoiding even the appearance of conflict of interest. So if there's a potential conflict, the board member should disclose and recuse himself or herself from even discussing the items. Really, sometimes the voice is more powerful than a vote. So it's not just recusing yourself from the vote, but if you knowingly have a conflict of interest, you should recuse yourself from discussing the topic. Members with any potential conflict should follow those procedures. And then the chair can help members hold each other accountable for following that policy. So I said at the beginning, an important value to me is curiosity. And I love this image because when we're curious, it tends to bring us joy. And when we're curious, we tend to ask questions that are not accusatory or closed off. They tend to be open-ended. When we ask curious questions of our colleagues or of our superintendents, it's met with a lot less resistance than if we're not curious. But very importantly, we want you to learn and apply all that you possibly can, and know at the same time, there's always more that we can learn. There's always more that we can better understand. Carrie, before I move on, are there some questions or comments in the chat that we should consider or address?
No, I don't see any questions at this point. If you have any, you can put them in the Q&A. I see someone just popped into the chat. Let's see.
Very good.
It says, I'm a new board member and I'm finding it confusing to understand how to comply with and implement Vermont's open meeting law as it applies to after meeting communications, emails, learning together. It seems cumbersome, ineffective compared to other boards I've been on. Any guidance on this you can offer?
Yeah, well, we have an attorney on the call, VSBA's Executive Director, Sue Siglowski, and I'll let her address that, and she may have some great guidance also for where you can learn more about that or just how to navigate it.
Absolutely. We did a webinar last May with the Deputy Secretary of State, Chris Winters, and that was an excellent webinar, covered all aspects of the open meeting law. I would encourage you to watch the recording of the webinar, and there's also the PowerPoint is available along with the recording. If you go to the VSBA website, it's under webinar archives. And as I said, it was last May. And I think that will be very, very helpful for any new board member to review that. We're also doing new board member training in May. There's going to be 2 sessions, and I'm sure that we'll talk about the open meeting law in the new board member training as well. And for board chairs, there's joint superintendent board chair training that we do every year. And open meeting law is one of the issues that we typically cover, because that's one of the requirements under the law to be covered in that training as well.
Thank you, Sue. I can echo the board members' pain. When I joined a school board, I had heard of open meeting laws, sunshine laws, and I really didn't know or understand how important they were. Fortunately, I had a colleague on the board that had served on other types of governmental entities and was very familiar with them. And so I really appreciated his guidance in helping me understand why they were important and when I or someone else might be in violation of them, because they have come about for very important reasons. And let's see if I can advance. We just wanted to make sure that there are a couple of resources available to you additionally for board chairs. There's the board chair toolkit, and there's also, this may be too late for right now, but there's also the reorganizational meetings toolkit. And these are all available on our website, www.vtvsba.org. And so those are some specific resources that you might find helpful. There was one other thing I just wanted to touch on. Be careful what you put in an email. Public disclosure laws and discovery laws. You don't want to put anything in a newspaper that you wouldn't want to have, or you wouldn't want to put anything in an email that you wouldn't want to have go into a newspaper. And I was recalling an experience just a few years ago where a newspaper reporter had contacted me and requested some information. And his reply was a little bit snarky, but he had intended his reply for his editor, and he accidentally sent that reply to me. When I read that, and I just smiled, and of course I replied to him, this is a great reminder for both of us not to put anything in an email that we wouldn't want to have printed in a newspaper. So we all may feel frustrated or snarky from time to time, and we do need to be very, very careful what we put in an email, even a text, right, that might be subject to public disclosure and could potentially not just make us look bad, but make our district look bad. And that's probably even more important. A VSBA is a membership organization. We appreciate your involvement, and we take it very seriously. We appreciate your trust of us. But the 4 of us on the staff at VSBA are an available resource to you. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, if you'd like to be maybe more involved in the association or know more about how you could do that, we would invite you to reach out to us too. So on behalf of VSBA, I want to say thank you for attending this webinar. We hope that you found some valuable insights here and information that might be of benefit to you. Again, I would underscore sort of three things. I really encourage the board chair to take ownership of the development of the school board. Not that you have to do that by yourself or in a vacuum, but take advantage of the resources that are available to you through your superintendent, through VSBA, other networks you may have to ensure that the board is learning and growing to be the leadership team that you and your district need it to be. The other thing is, ensuring that you have norms in place, adopted and agreed protocols that you're revisiting every year and making sure that those are working for you. And finally, I would just say again, stay curious. There's a lot to learn in this work. It's an ever-changing landscape in public education, but we do have a very important vehicle or entity that's been handed to us in public education, a valuable tradition in our state and in our country. And I would encourage you to take great care with it and continue to stay curious about how you might do better. Carrie,
Bill,
was there a last question?
There is another question, yes. The person said, I am the chair of a rural school district. Getting board members to actually run and serve on the board is a constant struggle. Any suggestions on creating the balance between the work required to educate new board members, have them participate in the board member trainings without burning them out? This is particularly true the last 2 years. Maybe the question is, what should I prioritize? Thank you.
Well, you've got to keep it fun, right? So the norms of every healthy group have to include some level of fun. And I might add into that self-care. We have all been through a lot in the last 2 years. And I've watched superintendents across the country just right at a complete nervous breakdown. I've seen dozens of school board members, say, this is not what I signed up for. I'm out of here, throw in the towel. And people are having a hard time. One of the valuable opportunities of serving on a school board is you are part of a group, and you're part of a valuable, vital group that can make a difference in the success of the students in your district. And so I think reinforcing that intrinsic value of serving on a school board and trying to make it fun, trying to have some activities and just, things together that people not only feel good about it, but they don't want to let their team down because they're a part of something, belonging to something. It is a valuable way to reinforce positive service. Carrie, it looked like, was there another question?
No, I think we're all cleared up. I answered that one.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for participating in this. Look for the email to follow and give us your feedback on what you thought about this webinar and what we could do to improve our webinars in the future. Thank you.